Adam Taxin here, talking with Cheng, who is a California attorney based in Southern California, but also more prominent, as mentioned in the New York Times in a big story a few days ago, as one of the candidates to be on Harvard's Board of Overseers with an insurgent slate, which includes Ron Unz and Ralph Nader. And his particular issue, related to some other things he does, is the ongoing problem of discrimination against Asian Americans uh, via affirmative action and other means. And well, he's been active in that cause. Lee, thanks for joining me. And why don't you tell me a little bit about what's going on in the audience?
Sure, Adam. Thanks for having me on. I am part of a slate of candidates, including Ralph Nader. It's a very bipartisan group of candidates that Ralph Nader, prominent legal scholar and activist Stuart Taylor, and Ron Unz, who was a former candidate for governor of California, and Stephen Chu, a noted physicist, that is seeking to drive change at Harvard. Some of us are very much motivated by the fact that we believe that both statistics and anecdotal evidence supports the proposition that Harvard and most elite institutions of higher education require Asian American candidates to achieve just so much more, not just academically, but holistically across the board, to gain admission out of a completely misguided and arguably illegal program that makes race, the use of race in admissions, determinative, not just one of many factors. But that said, we are really actually running on a platform of consisting of two planks. The first plank is to make Harvard free. And it's free in the sense that we would simply seek to use much more or as much of the income from Harvard's enormous, close to $40 billion endowment to defray the cost, ever rising, ridiculously, unreasonably increased cost of tuition. And it hardly makes Harvard free. It really is just to defray the cost of tuition, which this year runs in the neighborhood of $45,000. It's more than twice what it was when you and I attended Harvard.
Which was, we were in the class of 93, just for the record. Even though we didn't know each other too well at Harvard, we just recently linked up. I'm just saying that for the audience.
Yeah, thanks to Facebook, of course. But the second plank is what we call fair Harvard, and it's very, very important. And what everybody on this platform is seeking is, let's just for starters say, let's give Harvard the benefit of the doubt and say, okay, Harvard isn't discriminating against anyone based on race, and it isn't setting grotesquely differential standards for candidates based on race. Let's just give Harvard the benefit of the doubt. If that's true, Harvard should have absolutely no issue with disclosing and becoming completely transparent about the criteria that it uses for admissions and about various non-personal statistics about each entering class. And and this push for transparency has implications. I mean, the members of the slate would, as overseers, if elected, push very, very hard to make sure that Harvard voluntarily discloses this data in the interest of full transparency and making sure that the playing field for admissions levels out, for everybody. It's not just for Asian American applicants, literally for everybody. Right now, I think it's well established and well known that the children of the privileged really have an upper hand in admissions. They have access to private schools, the counselors that they hire privately who attended, who were in many cases Ivy League admissions officers. And nobody really knows exactly what criteria, these elite schools like Harvard use and how much they're weighted. We would push for full transparency in admissions so everybody knows what the rules are, everybody knows what they're supposed to do, and everybody will have equal access to the benefits of Harvard education.
Let me play devil's advocate for a second and say, well, I can say from my vantage point, I was in the most Asian upper class house of all, Quincy House. Harvard is not exactly lacking in Asian Americans. Isn't there a value to diversity for itself? Are you looking for a situation like University of California, Berkeley, which is obviously a public school? Harvard is private, though obviously it's tied to the government in some ways. Where, what's your goal for 60, 70% of the admitted students to be Asian American?
Oh, absolutely not, Adam. I mean, I can say with 1,000% sincerity, right? After all, I mean, I've already I already got into Harvard. I went to a pretty decent law school. I actually couldn't care less if, changes in admissions policies didn't result in a single extra Asian American applicant being admitted to Harvard. My goal is not to increase the number of Asian Americans enrolled at Harvard or admitted at Harvard or anywhere else. I do think and I feel very strongly that people should not be discriminated against. And, my objective is simply, and I think the other members of our slate share this view in varying degrees, is that the playing field should be level for people of all backgrounds. And that, especially coupled with the plank of free tuition, that it's going to encourage, many other, a wave of applications to Harvard from people who otherwise might not have even considered Harvard because of the cost of tuition as well as room and board. And, so I also happen to, and, call me an idealist, but I also happen to believe that, diversity is very, very important. It adds value to society and to every single institution and organization where it exists. But I also believe that diversity is far more than skin deep. It truly should only be one of many factors, and that there is a tremendous amount of diversity within every single group, and that it is not only mistaken but also fundamentally racist to make an assumption that just because two people happen to look, very similar in terms of their hair color and eye color, that they somehow have beliefs and character that are also the same. Race should not be used as a proxy for diversity, just like race should not be used as a proxy for disadvantage.
Yeah, Lee, I just want to bring up my original, I thought I'm Jewish. The first issue, this is not a new issue. They had issues in the 30s and 40s. I think it was those decades where it was alleged that Harvard was discriminating against very academically qualified Jewish students. In fact, that's what made legacy admission so important at that point. So it was a way to discriminate without discriminating against Jewish students because they didn't want Jews to overwhelm the university. Is there an element of that right now, or is there a way that ties in? I mean, just the history here.
Well, I don't think it's accurate to say that it was alleged. It's been proven. It's been admitted. It's historical fact that Harvard and other elite universities discriminated against Jewish students who, studied hard and worked hard and excelled across the board. And and now there's recognition and remorse in those circles, certainly in the anti-Semitic circles, that those policies were put into place with a specific view to limiting the number of Jews, and in that era, to giving a leg up to non-Jewish white men,
right,
and especially the quote-unquote young gentlemen who had certain intangible characteristics, collegiality, gentlemanly characteristics that I think were dominant in the ruling classes of America at the time. At that time, merit-based admissions to Harvard were weakened, as they are being right now, and we hear very, very many of the same echoes of anti-Semitism, the anti-Semitism that resulted in the anti-Jewish quotas and caps and the policy changes in admissions. We hear many of those echoes of the same, of the same type of prejudice today in efforts to, change admissions and to make admissions processes opaque and subjective. You do hear prominent politicians, including people who are often considered lions and heroes, of the progressive left, use rhetoric to the effect that it's actually very alarming rhetoric to the effect that, gosh, if we made these, or the admissions at these schools, merit-based, right, race-neutral, we would have campuses that would have nothing but Asians in them, right? It really, again, reminds me of what I read about, people who helped pass the Chinese Exclusion Act and helped incite riots.
Right, but Lee, but let me jump in here. Is it not true that University of California at Berkeley is over 50% Asian?
I
I mean, obviously California's
actually, it's
demographics.
not true.
Oh, it's not true. Good. I'm glad you
It's not
cleared
true.
that
It's
up.
about 40%, 40 to 45% Asian.
Okay.
But Asian American. This is what I'd like to emphasize. I mean, this is something that I say with complete sincerity that I don't see a class that's 40% Asian. I don't think we should be viewing it as a class that's 40% Asian or 10% or 20% Hispanic or white or whatever. We should be viewing that as a class that's 100% or 90% American minus all the international students, right?
Mm-hmm.
The last time I checked, we're supposed to be equal in the eyes of the law. And the last time I checked, somebody of Asian descent, and certainly I would hope that somebody of Asian descent, right, can be considered fully American and equal to every other American with the same rights.
Now,
Opportunity and not result.
what
That's
do you
how I look at it.
what do you say to the argument that Harvard being in a unique position? Well, first of all, let me ask you. You said something about the financial aid, but doesn't really everyone who applies to Harvard who needs financial aid get it at this point?
No, absolutely not. That's not true. So Harvard says that people who make, I think, who are applicants who are admitted come from families who that make something like less than $65,000
Right.
have to pay tuition, right? And then families who make up to a amount something in the neighborhood of $180,000 to $220,000 can qualify for financial aid,
Mm-hmm.
right? So first of all, $180,000 to $200,000 it sounds like a lot, but certainly after taxes in
Right.
many cities and urban areas, it really doesn't stretch that far.
Right.
And it is a huge for the children of the middle class in many
Right.
instances to be able to afford even the tuition of Harvard, which has increased, at a rate that far exceeds inflation over the last 20 to 30 years. It doesn't really tie to very much. The increase doesn't tie to a whole lot. So it's not true that anybody who wants to go to Harvard can go to Harvard or any of these Ivy League schools who tout for generous financial aid policies, and it is very much a deterrent for kids who, otherwise have earned a seat at institutions. And it's not like Harvard can't afford to increase its financial aid. I view with tremendous skepticism Harvard's excuse that its endowment is heavily restricted. As a lawyer, I understand that there may be restrictions tied to various gifts. As a lawyer, I completely view with skepticism. In fact, I think it is borderline misleading for Harvard to argue that there aren't, any number of ways that the endowment, and certainly just a small percentage of the endowment income. I'm not talking about even touching the endowment, but just the endowment income on an annual basis
Well,
can be directed to helping to make Harvard fully accessible. The cost of tuition not an issue for anybody.
Lee, since we're talking about Harvard, though, I mean, isn't part of the issue that you have so many people, especially with the fact that admissions are done much more easily now and online than when we applied? Harvard probably has 10, 15 qualified students for every spot there. And I know we couldn't say this if we were talking to a quote, something Harvard regards as a safety school like Cornell or something. But, Harvard's going to get the best of the applicant pool anyhow. Why should they, and why not be a little bit more fiscally responsible and take someone whose family can afford it, who's just as qualified as someone whose family can't afford it, and get the full tuition out of it? They do have to make money. And then the other issue is, even with discrimination, you're going to get a class of very top qualified people to begin with when you're talking about Harvard as opposed to maybe another school.
Well, let's talk about discrimination first. First of all, discrimination is illegal and it's also immoral, right?
But what about Harvard's a private school? Again, it's connected to the government. It's not totally illegal at a private school.
If Harvard gave up all of its federal funding tomorrow, and also if Harvard was willing to forego its nonprofit status, by which it indirectly basically benefits to the tune of very likely several $billion a year in tax, basically in not having to pay tax, then I think, first of all, you would have a stronger argument that it can discriminate in any way that it wants in the United States, that even if legally Harvard could discriminate, I certainly think that any right-thinking American would want to do everything possible to force an institution of Harvard's prominent influence to not discriminate. In admissions, going back to the physical points that you were making, which are valid, which is, I can see, gee, Harvard already only admits something like 5% of applicants, right? And if you eliminated, if you eliminated the bar of tuition, and you made Harvard a realistic target of even more people, wouldn't you simply just end up with more applicants? The answer is yes. And I don't think that it ever hurts to have Harvard have more people apply, simply because, Harvard could very well benefit from people who are students who are diamonds in the rough, from underprivileged backgrounds.
Fair enough.
Who would apply, and there's nothing wrong with increasing standards at all. For admissions, there's nothing wrong with having an even better and even stronger class than it has now. And in finances, again, it's not like the free Harvard thing is really just a slogan.
Right, of
Harvard
course.
will not be free. There will still be room and board that a student and their families will have to pay for. That at present, I believe the room and board at present is not terribly far from what you and I had to pay in 1989.
Well, they haven't upgraded
for
the rooms that much, probably either.
Yeah, for tuition, and it really, it really comes down to also this, right? The transparency plank, the fair Harvard plank, where everyone on Slate is united for a push for transparency. This is for transparency beyond simply admissions. This is for transparency in the way Harvard is governed and makes decisions, right? This is for transparency, around, really how its money is allocated and spent. Is it spent in ways that, that support an educational mission, right? And right now, no one knows.
Gotcha.
No one really knows.
Gotcha.
So that, yeah.
Well, Lee, I do want to wrap this up simply for the reason that the shorter it is, the more likely people are actually to listen to it. And I'm sure we'll revisit this again. I'm happy to talk to you more in the future as this proceeds. But I just want to give you a chance to make a pitch for whatever you want people to know, whether they went to Harvard or not, and just publicize whatever it is you want to publicize right now at the end of this.
Greatly appreciated, Adam. And, I want to, to enlist the support of anybody in your audience who hears this, who is a Harvard alumni or who knows Harvard alumni, who can help us out, help this initiative out to push for change at Harvard by signing a petition to nominate the 5 candidates on the Free Harvard, Fair Harvard slate for the Board of Overseers. We need 201 signatures, and Harvard doesn't make it easy. They have to be on specially printed ballot papers that we have copies of that we FedEx to people. If they simply can, along with the prepaid return envelope, as long as they can send their address and their phone number to address to me at lee@freeharvard.org, and we can get a packet of these ballots out to them for them to sign.
Okay, so 200 seems doable. I mean, 201 seems reasonably doable if enough people just call their friends from school and get it done. So this could be very helpful.
It's doable, Adam, but it's not cheap and it's not easy.
I know it's not cheap. I know it's not easy.
You got to get the packets out to people. So,
I know.
We need help and any support we can, and certainly I think we need people to spread the word.
Okay.
That when the official, assuming that we get on the ballot, the slate on the ballot, when the ballots from Harvard arrive for the Board of Overseers to vote for the people on the Free Harvard, Fair Harvard slate.
Of course. But that's a few months away. That's not till spring, right?
That's correct. That's correct. Getting the vote out is going to be critical to our ability to affect change.
Great.
Sadly, Harvard alumni seem to be very similar to the voting public at large, and something like 5 to 8% apparently send their ballots in every year. And therein lies the opportunity, because people, the Harvard alumni who care, and want to seize this chance to effect change should send their ballots back in, and should send it back in not for highly qualified, overachievers that the Harvard Alumni Association nominates, but for the slate of candidates who want to be very, very focused on forcing our alma mater to embrace change that we think ultimately will be good for Harvard and good for higher education.
Well, I obviously appreciate and approve very much of what you're doing, and I'm sure we'll talk again, but thank you for taking the time, Lee Cheng, to talk with me right now and explain a little bit about what's going on.